Hi, everyone, and thank you for being here. Before we begin the presentation, I want us to do a little bit of an exercise, if you will. Just want to indulge me for a little bit. So if everyone in the room could just close their eyes. Everyone close their eyes. It's okay, close their eyes. Thank you. With your eyes closed, I want you to imagine your favorite spot you like to go to. It could be a restaurant, a park, a cafe, a store. I want you to imagine the last time you went there. How did you feel when you were en route there? What landmarks do you see? A particular house, maybe, with the red door, a side street, creepy alleyway? What sounds do you hear? How do you feel when you've arrived? What are you doing there once you've gotten there? I want you to hold that image in your mind, just for a moment. Now, keeping your eyes closed, I want you to clear your mind of that image. Think of something else. Puppies, flowers, a TikTok video, whatever. Just keep your eyes closed. Now, with your eyes closed, I want you to imagine again going to that same spot, your same favorite spot. Only this time, something feels a bit different. Something feels a bit off. Were you supposed to turn left or right to get to your favorite spot? Did the house have a red door? Maybe it was a red garage. Was it a creepy alleyway? Was it a creepy street? You can't quite really remember. You're all turned around now. You can't figure out why you can't remember. You've gone there so many times. In fact, you always go there on Fridays, and today is Friday, isn't it? Today is Friday? Now something really doesn't feel right. Something is really off. You can open your eyes now. Thank you very much. One of the early signs of dementia is to become lost when you're going somewhere and forgetting the date and the day of the week. Now, we often forget things from day to day, but with dementia, it's profoundly different. Today, I want to talk with you about dementia and my family's journey with dementia in Canada with my father. I hope to offer you a new perspective on how we think about it and ways that we can help those that we care about. My father's doctor recently said that he doesn't often get to meet the Growing up, my dad was my best friend. He taught me everything I know. He taught me right and wrong, how to go grocery shopping, and he was always the good parent, which really means he let me get away with way too much. He let me go to sleepovers and gave me most things that I wanted. Most of all, he listened to me. He truly saw me, and he loved me and believed in me fiercely. He encouraged me to be anything I wanted to be, and so I did. When I think about who my father is, I think about the best man in the world. I remember feeling excited every time he would come home from work. It would mean hugs and kisses, presents and stories, and falling asleep to the scent of Old Spice and egusi soup. Egusi soup is a traditional Nigerian dish that we had in our home growing up, still one of my favorites to this day. My father was a learned man, brilliant, resilient, and creative. He received his PhD in 1980 from Columbia University, before the internet. So that meant he wrote his assignments here in Canada, mailed them down to the States, and received feedback and his grades via mail or the telephone. He spent a lifetime pursuing higher education as a dark-skinned African man with a thick accent, full lips, and a wide nose. From Nigeria to London to the US to Canada. And he was discriminated against every step of the way. His perseverance would become the blueprint for my family and myself on how to handle adversity and navigate through life. So, it was particularly devastating when we received the diagnosis in 2008 that he had what the doctor said was Alzheimer's. When my father was told, we were sitting in the den with the occupational therapist. The therapist had come over to the house to assess us for mobility devices my father might have needed. He was the one who delivered the news to my dad. My father had been asking him why he was there in the house. And despite the therapist's explanations, my father kept asking. Finally, the therapist said, "Mr. Iroanyah, Don't you know? You have Alzheimer's disease." When my father heard that, his face got very long and very sullen. He lowered his head and stared at the table, then looked up at the physiotherapist, the occupational therapist, and he said, "I see. Will I ever get better?" The therapist gently said, "No, sir, you won't." My father's face got long again. He lowered it to the table. After a few moments, he raised it up, looked at the therapist and said, "I see. Will I ever get better?" At that point, the therapist looked at me and I looked at him. I took my dad by the hand and I said, "No, Daddy, you won't." My father lowered his head again, raised it up and said, "I see." At that moment, I knew this was it. Our lives would be forever different. When my family received his diagnosis, it hit us like a ton of bricks. We felt completely lost and certainly alone. My family had never heard of dementia. There wasn't even a word in our language for it. Moreover, mental health was largely stigmatized in my family and in my community. But here it was, for the whole world to see. Only thing is, they didn't. My extended family, they didn't believe us. They dismissed it. They minimized it. They didn't really comfort us. Now, at the time, I was very hurt and confused. They had always been so very supportive of my family, but after my father's diagnosis, things had shifted in our dynamic. But in looking back, if I'm being honest, how could they have known? They didn't have any experience with dementia. My friend group was very similar. Like most of you here, we were young people just beginning our lives. We didn't know about dementia or its impact. It was a very lonely and isolating time for us. Over the years, my family's journey with dementia was incredibly hard. But I think the hardest time was during the COVID-19 pandemic. It just made everything worse. My father's condition worsened at an even quicker pace, and things had become more dire for my family. I was asked to write about my family's experience as a segment of a book called African, Caribbean, and Black People's Resilience During COVID-19. I'm just going to read an excerpt from the chapter that I wrote called Where Did Daddy Go? I called in his caseworker who came over to the house to do another assessment. I asked her if her clients were like this. She emphatically said yes, some were even worse. The COVID lockdowns, isolation restrictions, it meant that personal support workers weren't able to come over to the house. That meant less socialization and less stimulation for the person living with dementia, and it meant less respite for their family members. She said a lot of people on her caseload were deteriorating. I asked her for more PSW hours, more nurses, or something. The helplessness was growing inside of me. My father had a bed sore on his heel that had become quite large, and we couldn't get him to the doctors because they were only seeing certain patients during that time. We dressed his wounds ourselves, and then a few nurses were able to help. It took a few months, but it healed nicely. But he was at that stage. He was more despondent. He was not continent, but still responsive to our voices and our touch. That was the consolation. That was enough. He couldn't get in and out of bed easily anymore. He couldn't sit on the chair anymore. It was now apparent my father needed those assisted devices. Now, since my father's diagnosis, I have spent a large part of my academic career trying to understand dementia from a cultural perspective. When I first began to research what dementia is, I also found out what it isn't. I learned that dementia is an umbrella term that describes a cluster of conditions that affect how and what you think, how you feel, your memories, how you move, and how you speak. Dementia is a progressive disease, which means there is no cure. And there are many different kinds of dementia. Alzheimer's is the most commonly known, but there's also vascular dementia, Lewy body dementia, and others. People often think that dementia exclusively affects seniors, and even though my father was 68 when he was diagnosed, dementia is not a normal part of aging. And even though the risk of dementia does increase with age, just because someone is older than 65 doesn't guarantee that you're going to get dementia. There are people with young onset dementia, which means you can get diagnosed in your 50s, your 40s, your 30s, and your 20s. But I also learned that people with dementia can and do live very full lives. They work, they travel, they see family and friends, they partake in research, they publish, they dance. Yes, things may be a bit more challenging, and certainly as the disease progresses, but their contributions to society should never be diminished. I also learned about the importance of care partners. Care partners of people with dementia are so vital to the journey. I learned that mainly women do the caregiving, but the amount of hours and time and money was very, very surprising. Also surprising was the fact that spouses of people with dementia are at an increased risk of getting dementia themselves. The prolonged caregiving activities can lead to increased stress, depression, and anxiety, which unfortunately can increase cognitive decline. But in particular, I was very curious to how different ethno-racial groups experience dementia. My Nigerian father and family did not look like anybody on the brochures that we received from the doctors, nor the websites we went to for information. So I did more research. And there's not a lot of research on diversity and dementia in Canada. And I thought to myself, how can that be? According to the 2021 Canadian census, there's approximately 7 million people in Canada over the age of 65. Approximately 23% of the population were born in another country, and approximately 26% of the population identify as a visible minority. Now, when we intersect that with the fact that 600,000 people in Canada have dementia, with a projected increase to 1 million people by 2030, it was incredible to learn the gaps in knowledge that we have of dementia in ethno-racial communities. Of the research I did find, it was very scarce. There was not much data on dementia prevalence rates within ethno-racial groups or in comparison to the general population. There's very little research on caregiver experiences or experiences with the healthcare system. There's also very little research on dementia in Spanish-speaking communities or Arab communities as well. Now, within Indigenous, South Asian, and East Asian communities, there is some knowledge that we know of, but not nearly enough. And in my research, I only found one study on dementia in the Black community. Now, I did find more data on dementia in ethno-racial communities from research from the US and the UK. What I found was startling and profoundly sad. Indigenous, Black, and Hispanic groups had the highest prevalence rates of dementia. They also got dementia younger. These groups also face greater barriers to care, including getting a timely diagnosis and being offered culturally appropriate dementia care services. But despite all of this, all is not lost. I was happy to find that in Canada, there are some individual dementia care programs and services offered through culturally based community organizations. Culturally speaking, there are some long-term care facilities that cater to certain demographics. The Alzheimer's Society of Canada, along with some provincial societies, have been developing some culturally specific resources, programs, and services focused on ethno-racial communities. But despite this, much more needs to be done to ensure all people in Canada have access to inclusive dementia care services. And so I kept thinking about my father. How do we support him? Where can we get him help? As he progressed in his journey, we struggled to find him care that could accommodate his needs from a Nigerian perspective. There was none. For example, in my culture, caregiving is a family affair and not placed on one person. A lot of people are involved in the care and decision-making so people can stay at home longer. So long-term care homes was not really a consideration in our care plans early on, but they proved to be a necessity in the later years. And there was a lot of guilt in that decision-making, despite how much it was needed. When we were first told of the Alzheimer's Day programs, we were hesitant to take him. We knew my dad needed it for his socialization and the family needed the respite, but we knew it wasn't culturally competent. So there were going to be some challenges that we faced, and there were. They didn't have cultural food options, nor did they have any recreational activities that could remind him of his time back in Nigeria. Now, while on this journey, I often have conversations with people who are in similar circumstances. They often ask me, what can we do? There's nothing available for us from our cultural background. What can we do? And I tell them, I say, while Canada is becoming more inclusive when it comes to dementia, it's very important to still get an early diagnosis. An early diagnosis means access to the right services, treatment options, and the right resources for your loved one. I also say educate yourself on the signs and symptoms of dementia so you can know and be preventative in action of what's to come, and also help destigmatize the disease in your family. In spite of all that we've done for my father, I have to be honest, there are times that I am still quite heartbroken and I feel quite helpless and ashamed that I couldn't do enough. But I have to tell myself it's not going to help my father or my family to stay in that emotional space. So over the years, I've learned compassion for myself, I've learned acceptance for each changing moment, and embraced joy where I could find it on this journey. And it's from this new space that I'm able to do some reflections. What would I tell my younger self about this journey? What would I say? I think to myself, and I go back to that October night when my father first received the news, and I wish I could tell myself, "Dear Ngozi, that was a lot to absorb, I know. And I'm sorry, honey, I know that hurts. But I need you to know it's going to be okay. It may not seem like it now, but the family will be okay. We're just on a new journey. And yes, things will be different. There will be changes. Daddy won't always be himself. He'll start to say things you won't always understand and act in ways that aren't quite like him. But please know that he will always love you, and you will grow to love him in ways that you never thought were even possible. You will give him your all, but remind yourself that you can only do the best that you can. Remember to rest. Remember to breathe. Remember to love you too. It's okay to feel whatever you feel and to be wherever you are on this journey. Remember to embrace the uncertainty, the unpredictability. Remember to let go of what isn't going to serve you and what you can't control. Hold on to the things that matter and the people that matter. Hold on to the memories. Remember to smile, to laugh, and to sing. Remember there will be pain in this journey. Remember what the doctor said. Dementia is a small part of your father's very long and very full life. Remember to find the beauty and the peace within it. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.